Hi guys, very quickly before I start the video, I'm going to give you a heads up. I'm sitting on the floor, I'm recording this on my phone. One, because I lost my tripod mount. Two, I have no cute studio space. So, bear with me and enjoy the video. Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel, which has quickly become a home for my film criticisms. While I usually talk about horror or intersectionality, today we're going theory. We're talking about ye olde auteur theory. You know the one, you either love her or you hate her. For those that are unfamiliar, auteur theory, or rather this grand idea of auteurship, goes way back to the 1940s during the era of French film criticism, with big names like André Bazin and Francois Truffaut. The SparkNote simple definition of auteur theory basically says that the director is the primary author of a film. They use the camera as a personal artistic tool, kind of like an artist would use a pencil, to create a consistent, recognizable style and vision throughout their works. That's the basic definition that most people agree on. However, the interesting thing about auteur theory and what deeper criteria goes into defining an auteur is the fact that literally no one can agree on anything. But that's theory for you. It's just a bunch of academics throwing stuff out there and hoping something sticks. Now, if we look at how Bazin and Truffaut define a real auteur, they say they are a director who is elevated above and holds the meaning of the film. They are not a metteur en scène or a scene setter. This basically means that just because a director knows how to make something look nice on camera, that doesn't make them an auteur. An inherent part of being an auteur is that your films are deeply personal pieces that reflect the worldview of the maker. Now, this gets expanded upon in the 60s by American theorist Andrew Sarris. Bear in mind, he is American, and so his list of who he sees as real auteurs reflects that, but this is the first time we see some real guidelines and criteria for what makes an auteur in his little circles. First, the director must have technical skill. Technique, he's got to be good at what he's doing. Second, the director must have a distinct personality that is visible in their body of work, or a personal style, a definitive style. And lastly, he says it must have interior meaning, or élan of the soul. Élan of the soul. Still not really sure what that means, but he defines it as what is extrapolated from the tension between the director's personality and his material. Right. Moving on, there's Peter Wallen, who looks at things more structurally. He looks at the semantic school, which focuses on the meanings and motifs in film, but he also looks at the formalist school, which discusses the signature stylistic features in the film's mise-en-scène. To make a long story short, he says that meaning and maybe auteurship is built across films and is unrelated to who has control of a production. The last person I'll talk about, or the last theorist rather, I'll talk about is Pauline Kael, Queen, who's another theorist who heavily criticized Sarris and went bar for bar with him back in the day. Her main issue with all of these old guys were they were completely forgetting the fact that film is collaborative. It's a collaboration of minds. It's not just one person doing everything. These auteurs of which they speak often rely on screenwriters, cinematographers, etc., etc. She specifically cites one of Sarris's faves, Orson Welles, in her 1971 essay Raising Cain, which looks at Wells's film Citizen Kane. She asserts that Welles was not a lone wolf, but instead he relied heavily on co-writer Herman and on the cinematographer Greg Toland. For her, films are not their directors, they are shaped by the contributions of many. And this brings me back to now. You're probably asking, Selena, why should we care? And I'm glad you asked, because I asked myself that exact same question. First of all, is auteurship even relevant to today, let alone real? And when I started thinking about this video, which is for class, I kept going back to film franchises. And you guys know I love a film franchise. The good, the bad, the ugly, and deranged. Give it to me. But specifically, I started thinking about two of my favorites. The Final Destination franchise, and of course, the Fast and Furious franchise. Between these combined 17 films, there's at least 10 directors. So that begs the question, where does auteurship sit in all of this? But then I thought about it more and I was like, but I feel like there are like modern day auteurs that exist, or at least that's what we call them. I don't know, or so I thought, but more on that in a minute. But let's go back to the original question. Why does this even matter? Does it even exist? For critics, auteur theory is a tool to help organize films. It helps us see patterns and recurring themes across a filmmaker's body of work in order to evaluate films more deeply. By framing directors as authors, it also aligns us with other art forms like literature, where authorship is kind of a big deal. But in a more modern context, it's literally just branding. That's all it is. It's branding. Directors and their voices and styles have become brands which play into marketing. Think about Tarantino, Ryan Coogler, Wes Anderson, king of branding. It's become a thing where audiences come to see a film simply because of the director, not because of the story, not because of the actor, but who's making the film. Through the eyes of capitalism, it's a lot easier to sell weird renegade films as the new James Cameron, the new Nolan, the new Fincher, the list goes on. But in reality, all of these one-name films are also products of mass collaboration. We have directors that I thought to be auteurs, like Spike Lee and Bong Joon-ho. Spike Lee, whose work is marked by a recurring focus on race, history, and political activism, while Bong Joon-ho films often critique class inequality and capitalism. These directors leave a signature on every project they touch, blending genre and theme in ways that feel distinctly their own. But realistically, Spike Lee relies on a dedicated team, with many of his films featuring production design by Wynn Thomas or starring Denzel Washington. And trust me, it doesn't hurt to have Denzel in your film carrying some of that weight. And with Bong Joon-ho, he collaborates closely with writers and designers like Lee Ha-joon or actors like Song Kang-ho. The idea of a singular auteur falls apart when you realize just how many people are involved in actually making a movie. Which puts me on the side with Kale. Film is a collaborative effort. Writers, actors, editors, cinematographers, production designers, they are all a part of shaping a film. Scholars like Wallen have even pointed out that recurring patterns across a director's films come from systems, not just the director themselves. And even old Bazan. The director's vision was important, but not absolute. The contributions of others were vital to the end product. But let's go back to this discussion on franchises. Franchises are really unique in the fact that they often have a rotating cast of directors, and they're really like studio driven in their approach to continuity and to branding. Directors may come and go, but the interior meaning of the film remains largely the same. Very quickly, let's look at Final Destination and the Fast and Furious and the roster of directors that they have had. In the case of Final Destination, the directors are as follows. James Wong directed 1 and 3. David R. Ellis directed 2 and 4. Stephen Quayle directed 5. And Adam Stein and Zach Lipovsky directed Bloodlines. Then there's Fast and the Furious. Brace yourself. The first film was directed by Robert Cohen. The second was directed by John Singleton, which is insane to me. Boys in the Hood, Baby Boy, Oscar-nominated director John Singleton directed Too Fast, Too Furious. Then there's 3 through 9, so Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, Fast and Furious, Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, Furious 7, Fate of the Furious, and F9, all directed by Justin Lin. Shout out to Justin. F10 was directed by Louis Leterrier, and the Hobbs and Shaw spinoff was directed by another guy, David Leitch, can't pronounce his name. In the case of Fast and the Furious, there is not a big political meaning of the film, so this elan of the soul doesn't really apply. The franchise, at its root, is literally drive fast and the importance of family. The films start with them stealing DVDs and MP3 players, and then it becomes this insane world where Ludacris and Tyrese Gibson are launching a car into space. But despite all of the grandiosity and the ridiculousness, the core of the film is the same, and Dominic Toretto is always there to remind you of that.
I got family. There's always room for family. Salute mi familia.
Fast and the Furious is also important in this discussion of like collaborative film because while yes, Justin Lin did direct 7 out of 11 of the Fast and Furious films, on all of those films that he directed, Chris Morgan was the writer. So who's to say Chris Morgan is not the auteur of the film? He's just as involved in the narratives, the themes, and the dialogue, and that makes him equally important. In this sense, auteurism becomes blurred. It's not just about the director's vision, but about the collaborative process that includes other people whose voices echo and we hear them in every installment. Looking at Final Destination, despite the changing directors, the core concept of the series, fate, creative death scenes, and a group of survivors facing inevitable doom remains intact. The franchise's identity is largely shaped by its overarching concept, not by any one director's personal vision. And even looking at all of the directors, they all have their own frequent collaborators who tagged along for their installment, whether that be as a writer, AD, production design, or something else. Nobody was alone when they were making these films. All of this combines and reinforces my thought that solitary authorship in film is imaginary and maybe even a little bit dismissive. This is exactly the point that Cale was making. Auteurism oversimplifies the creative process. Especially in the context of franchises, the auteur is not the director alone. It's a collaborative creation shaped by many hands and many minds. And yet, the industry continues to frame directors as the authors of films, despite the fact that these films are shaped by an ongoing dialogue between directors, writers, and sometimes whole rooms of creatives. Auteur theory often assumes that a director's personal ideology is reflected in their work, but in reality, the politics of a film are shaped by a much broader set of factors: who's working on the film, the industrial pressures, and the context in which the film is made. Do I think auteurship could be useful? Maybe. But we have a long way to go in developing and understanding the nuance of this idea. Yes, auteur theory can help us appreciate the patterns and recurring themes across a filmmaker's work, but it also runs the risk of overshadowing the contributions of the many people who also give shape to a film. From the writers to the cinematographers to the often overlooked but crucial roles of editors and production and sound designers like Ludwig Göransson and Ryan Coogler, film is at its heart a collaborative art form. It's a big old group project. But anyway, you guys get it. The next time you watch your favorite film, whether it's an indie drama or a summer blockbuster, remember there's more to the story than just the director's name on the poster. But thanks for sticking around to the end. But yeah, I want to hear what you guys have to think. Is the director really the author of a film, or have I successfully convinced you otherwise, and that the auteur is just a neat, marketable myth? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, keep studying, keep watching, and stay curious. Bye, guys.